Welcome to the Immigrant Entrepreneurs Podcast, episode 39.
Immigrant founders are 35% more likely to have a patent than firms with no immigrant founders. Immigrant founders have founded 51% of the startup companies worth $1 billion. So I don't know if anybody is aware that Google and Tesla were started by immigrants.
My name is Alina Warwick, and today we have Laura Kinser on the show. Laura is a startup consultant that had a wealth of experience working in a number of startups in the Silicon Valley. In this episode, she brings in her expertise as to what she offers her immigrant clients, and we talk about a whole lot of resources that will benefit all immigrants listening, from where to acquire capital, where to obtain grants, and she takes us through the entire startup process. I'm super thrilled to have Laura on the show because she brings such invaluable resources and guidance to all of us. So let's dive right in. All right, Laura, thank you so much for coming on the Immigrant Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm super excited to talk to you. And you're a very special guest because you're not an immigrant, but you're going to provide such huge value to all the immigrants listening because you are a startup clinic consultant. So this fits right into all of my listeners, and we're going to have a blast. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be on here. This is great.
So let's talk a little bit about your journey and how you became a startup consultant. Tell us a little bit of your background and your experience.
Sure, I'd love to. And it's interesting. My background actually dovetails very specifically into kind of what you're doing here. So, I was working, take it back and rewind probably about 20 years ago because I'm that old. I was doing administrative jobs in the Silicon Valley, living there for a while in Silicon Valley, in California. And then after doing a series of administrative jobs, ended up kind of getting my big break, which was the director of operations for a manufacturing plant there in Silicon Valley that was actually run by an immigrant from Israel. And she had a very interesting and great success story. And they're called Sante Specialty Foods. Her story is really, really special. So I worked there and I ended up helping them open a new manufacturing plant, expand the business quite a bit while I was there. Learned a lot about starting a company and how the mechanisms of how that works from the inside and how challenging it really can be. I did that for a good 5 years. And after doing that, I did worked for a series of startups in the Silicon Valley. And I found that was the space I loved being in. There was so much energy and drive that you get by working in startups that you just don't get when you're not working in a startup. And the rest of the spaces, I loved it. So I became kind of a startup addict. That was my career from there. It was only startups. And so working there in the Silicon Valley for quite a bit, and then ended up moving here about 3 years ago.
Sacramento.
Sacramento area.
Yeah.
I moved here initially to get married, and that's where I started my consulting business. Once I moved here, I found the startup space wasn't the same as the Silicon Valley,
right? And
decided that consulting made a lot more sense for me. And then when I started doing that, really found out how much I had a passion for specifically consulting for startups. It gave me a lot more freedom, and it gave me the ability to do what I really wanted to do, which was work hands-on and support people directly in that way when they start a business. And so that's what I've been doing for the last few years, and I love it. It's amazing.
Laura, did you go to college?
Interestingly enough, I did not.
You did not. Okay. So kind of out of high school, did you just land in the startup companies in Silicon Valley?
Initially, I was actually raised in Modesto, California.
Oh, okay.
Central Valley. Started working at a very young age. I started working in an office as a receptionist when I was 16. So left high school directly, graduated early, and started working in an office, like I said, full-time when I was 16 years old. And then worked, like I said, a series of administrative jobs, moved to the Silicon Valley, and that's where I took it from there. I always loved working. I did skip college. I thought about it at the time, but I felt like I found my place.
Yeah, college is not for everyone, and it's not needed for everything. So rock on.
It hasn't been a hindrance to me.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more. What were some of the roles that you took on several of these startup companies?
Yes. So they were normally of an administrative or operational nature. So you end up being often like a project manager, really. So, I come on as a administrative or operations manager. That was always my kind of role. But what you do in that is you end up being like a jack of all trades. You kind of do all the stuff that's there that's practical. That's why it kind of is such a good fit for what I'm doing now, because you end up doing whatever lands your lap, and you end up managing and being responsible for a lot of the different components especially in a startup in that role. It's usually lean and mean in a startup. There's not a lot of people around. The people they hire, are all very key.
Yeah. And so you basically saw at the front end what it takes to build a startup, going through different stages. And probably did you see the capital being raised, the hiring and the PR, the media, the marketing, all those different stages, right?
Yes, that was what was great about a role like mine, because I wasn't super specific often to a department. I'd be able to have my hands in a lot of these things. So I'd have my hands in PR or capital raising or operations stuff kind of unilaterally. And so I got to experience a lot of that stuff across the board. It was really quite an education. Yeah.
Awesome. And so what kind of industries were you in? I'm just curious.
Yes, I was in SaaS, software as a service, manufacturing, like I mentioned. I was actually in cannabis, which is very interesting. They were pretty much my spaces.
Great. Awesome. Okay. So let's break it down for our listeners. What are the different steps and what does it take to start a business in 2021?
Definitely, I would say, your very first step initially is looking at your idea, your concept, your business model, and evaluating that to begin with, and ensuring that that's strong and that really is meeting a market need. Often people start a business with the inspiration of a personal need without thoroughly vetting their model or their idea to make sure there's a market need. There's a lot of people that would have access that want the same thing that you want. And so I'd say thoroughly vetting, your concept, your model.
And how do you do that?
If you're not somebody like me and you don't have experience in that background, I would say a couple of different ways. You can, DIY, do it yourself. And then, and that is a little bit of a challenge. I'll be honest with you. There's other things that are easier to DIY than this. But if I was going to break down for somebody else to do, I would be saying, again, it comes down to market research, connecting the market research, which that is a big challenge, honestly, if you don't have access to market research tools, if you're not a professional. But if you are internet savvy, you can find all this information out there. So really, it is taking it and connecting market research with what you're doing. And so that's doing a deep dive into the stats and numbers of your target demographic. So, say you're selling an item and that item is, should be marketed towards people that are middle-aged and female. So you would look in the areas of that and say, run the numbers, consumer research, which that is all out there, all the consumer research to see how much is being spent in that area. And is that increasing? Are people increasing in number buying that particular product in your target demographic? And so it's that kind of market research to see what really holds.
Got it. So we got step one down.
Yeah, vet your idea. Make sure you've got a good business model and a solid idea. And that's really step one. And step two is then to start, develop your initial business name or identity and story. Like who your business is, your why. This is what I always say. Why did you start it? Why is this important? Why does the world need what you're selling? Define your why this is important and what you're going to, why, but what you're going to tell the world as to why this is important. And your business name, something catchy, something with a marketing thing, your identity, who your business is in the world and how they will be marketed to everybody. So that'd be really step number two.
Okay.
Step number three, attack the legal stuff. And so that is all of obviously the permits, the licenses, getting your EIN. It's a series of steps, that make your business a legal entity. And from that is one thing that surprisingly enough can be more DIY than people really understand. There's a lot of tools out there right now for folks that can help them do that piece. And it obviously depends on what kind of business you're in. Some businesses obviously are more legally challenging than others. I would say if you're treading into the legally challenged spaces, like for example, cannabis, or there's a lot of other spaces that or like say healthcare, something medical. Those things, I would say if you're in that kind of space, get help. And, have a consultant help you, because those are spaces that you don't want to DIY your whole startup and your licenses and things like that, because obviously it could be fraught with challenges. And there's a series of steps to that depending on what you're in, but things like I said, getting your EIN and getting your business license and getting set up with a franchise tax board, and then getting, whatever special permits are specific to you. Are you going to have a storefront or are you not? If you're going to have a storefront, do you have a permit for that area? And so, get yourself legally sound and set up. That'd be next step.
And Laura, is that where you would identify if you're going to be an S Corp or an LLC or incorporated, or do all startups just come out with one legal entity?
No, they wouldn't be all one entity. And so this is the area, again, I'll identify areas I think that are important to say, should you do this yourself or should you get help? This is an area that you should get help because it's very important. And it's not a cookie cutter. It's not, they're all the same thing. It's very important that this is done right in the front and that it's selected the right way. And it completely depends on what your business model is, who you are, what you're doing, how much funding you have, and how much protection you need from liability. So for example, there's some spaces where it's very important that you're identified as an LLC. LLC is a limited liability corporation, and that provides some protection for you as an owner from liability. If something happens with the business. So that's why it's so important to get probably some support or help from a professional to do that. But yeah, that's a very important piece that should be done right up there with getting your business license and all your permits is getting yourself set up, formed. It's called formation. Getting yourself formed as a company.
Okay. Awesome. Great. So we got 3 steps down.
And so the next step is a very key, crucial one. I mean, people probably hear this all the time, but your business plan. So your business plan is hugely important in a number of ways. One of the primary ways is that no lender, investor, anybody that's going to give you money for your business or fund it will require a business plan. And they'll require in that business plan projections. So financials and sales projections that reflect or predict what your business will produce, what it'll make in revenue, and what it will cost to start it over the next 3 to 5 years. An area that I recommend getting support with. That's one of the things I do, but other people do. A lot of people do it, but I recommend getting support with. You could do part of that yourself, I'd say, but unless you have some kind of deep financial background, you've worked in the financial space, I would say definitely get help with your financials and sales projections. Because the biggest thing lenders and investors are going to look at is what was your methodology? I mean, you can imagine, it's kind of difficult to predict what a business will make or what it will cost to start.
Right.
Yeah, that's a tricky thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I can create, a business plan and be super optimistic and say I'll be making, in the millions of revenue next year. But who's to say, that it will make it, right? So where do people go to create these business plans?
The SBA is a great resource, the Small Business Association. It's a
Okay.
great resource for business plan stuff, for all of some of the data and some of the resources are listed there in the SBA. I was going to let you know that I was going to put up on my website, I'm putting up on my website today, a list of resources, and I'll list in there that you can share with your listeners. I'll list in there the spot they can go to for the SBA, like a central spot that they can find some of these resources. The important thing when you're looking at these resources online is to find the ones that are vetted and reliable, because there's a lot, as we know, and there can be people out there giving advice or selling their services that aren't really qualified to do so. And that would be totally detriment to you, to hire and pay somebody to do that, and it's not, done correctly. But they're a great resource for that, and they can connect you with a lot of places that do that. And especially for your listeners in that particular demographic, you can get discounted services and special packages or plans that are meant just for people that are immigrant entrepreneurs.
Awesome. I love it. Okay. So we got number 4 as develop a business plan. Number 5, am I hearing get capital?
Capital. Yeah. Get your money to go start your business. That's exactly it. Go get your capital. That's a very, I'm sure, important point that people are concerned with when they go to start this endeavor is how am I ever going to pay for this? Unless, you happen to be independently wealthy, that could be something that you really have to think about. The great thing, and I don't think everybody knows this, and again, I'll share this on my the resource that I share on my website, but is that there is some really interesting and cool programs out there that are meant only for immigrant entrepreneurs.
Wow.
So yeah, you just have to know where to look. And that's why I said SBA, because SBA is a great resource for that. But there is, especially now, the Trump administration has been rather tough on immigration policy. And the interesting thing is what's cropped up is a whole lot of entities and that really aren't feeling good about that. And that have put out their own grants, funding programs, and initiatives kind of in response to that and saying, offering resources and stuff out there for funding. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of cool stuff. I mean, I could list off, there's a whole lot of cool stuff out there. There's something called Y Combinator that has some funding opportunities for immigrant entrepreneurs. There's a few different things out there like that that are very similar to that. Fundera, actually, the website Fundera is a place that has some of these, like a central spot for resources for some of these funding for specifically for what they have funding opportunities for everybody on there, but they have them divvied out also by immigrant entrepreneurs. So that's a good spot to look for that as well. But definitely, again, making sure you have your finance. That's the most important thing, obviously, is making sure your financial projections and sales projections are really tight. But then, when you make sure that's all really, really good, finding all of those really special opportunities that are just meant for you. I would say, don't go compete in the open market with everybody else. Why do that? Mm-hmm. Because there's opportunities out there that are meant only for you, and it can be challenging. And I'll say that some of these funding sources, we all know, can be biased. Another one that just to throw out there, there's a couple more that they can look up that are just really great ones. There's something called the Immigrants Rising Entrepreneurship Fund.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's like grants. So if everybody doesn't know what a grant is, a grant really is free money. And there's lots of them out there that people aren't aware of. That are programs, somebody with an entity with a lot of money sets aside funds and it's distributed. And it's not money you have to pay back. It's not a loan. It's a grant. And so that's of that nature. The Capital Access Lab is another one that funds these type of things. And then the Startup Act 3.0, like I mentioned to you before when I sent you that information, is another source that has a lot of funding.
And tell us about the Startup Act. Tell us a little bit more about that.
There's a whole lot of stuff that goes into it. Sum it up, though. It's meant to develop jobs and to reform immigration, to create entrepreneurship visas that are very specific, to help kind of loosen that up. I will tell you that the Startup Act was going strong and doing well. The Trump administration did put some of these things on pause. So, what most people expect, though, is with the new administration that we're going to see it loosened up again. So if you go to look up the Startup Act online, you'll find conflicting information. But what's going to happen is as our new administration takes office, it's going to open up again. But again, it addresses that specifically. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes to it. And like I said, I'll list on my website more comprehensive information about it. But that's the intent of it, yes.
Yeah, we'll get all the links together. We'll put it on my show notes. It'll be listed on your website. So all of this is going to be linked for easy access to all of our listeners. So regarding capital, now I know I've heard that sometimes the processes in order to raise capital, you got to first knock on your friends and family's doors. Is that normally the case? Or say if you didn't want to connect with, your old buddies and you ask your mom or your dad, can you go to Y Combinator? Can you go to venture capitalists and go directly to them and seek for capital?
You can absolutely. Okay. Just to give you a little bit of background on the why on those, when you hear that term, you should be doing that, knocking on your independent network. That's born of a couple different reasons. Number one is that the SBA, when they do funding, the SBA does a lot of funding for people for starting businesses, and they require that you've exhausted your personal resources. And they require evidence that you have some kind of evidence that you've went to your family and your resources to ask for money and were turned down. That's one of the places. And then the other place is that investors and lenders will often, in the process of getting this funding put together, will ask the same thing. Have you exhausted your personal resources? But they also want to see that you have skin in the game. So they want to see that if you are not able to put up some of your own money, even if it's just a gesture of showing that you're invested yourself personally in it, then that you've asked your own personal network for it. So that's really where that came from, but it's not a requirement.
Okay. And so then follow-up question to the grants. Before you obtain grants, you have to be a legal company. So you have to go through all these steps first in order to ask for grant funding. Is that correct?
That is going to be true for a good 80% of everything we're talking about.
Okay.
But I don't want people to think that's always unilaterally true, because it's not. There are grants out there that address exactly that.
Got it. Okay.
To the right ones. But yeah, it's not always true. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, that's good to know. Great. Okay, so number 5, get capital. Is there a number 6, or are we launching?
Oh, no, definitely not. There's more steps than that.
Oh, no.
No, I'm sure you have to imagine it's starting a business.
Yeah.
We're trying to boil it down to 10 steps.
I'm thinking we got capital and now we're ready to roll. So.
Yeah, if only it was that easy. I wouldn't be needed. No, so the next step is really, and I would say this sounds like it's early in the game to be doing this. I would say marketing. Even before your business is up and running, you should be already at this stage, now that you know you've got your licenses, now that you know you've got your funding, you've got your business name, your next step is preemptively, before you open your doors, be marketing. And that's, have your business name out there, have a website, be social. Obviously, we all know social media marketing is huge right now. Spreading the word about your business and getting excitement drummed up about it and introducing the public to it before it ever even opens is really the best idea. And that's how you're going to get, bang for your buck, so that when you open your door, you have customers waiting. And I would say marketing, 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 and aligning yourself with a really good marketing partner to make sure that, somebody that really knows. This is an area where I wouldn't recommend you do a blend of DIY, but again, unless you have a background specifically in marketing, like you build websites and you are, have a background in that, you need somebody to guide you, because there's such specific things like building it. Say you build your website and you need to have SEO, search engine optimization, built into your site. So like how you found me, you go to Google and you plug in your name. That's the ideal situation. That's why I was excited that you found me that way. That you want Google to be able to find you, and that has to be built into all of your website and your stuff that's online. And I would say, if anybody's not aware of this out there, the old ways of, TV commercials and sending out flyers is just not the marketing now. It's not effective. Social media marketing is a good, 85 to 90% of the marketing efforts that are out there. But yeah. So marketing, that's the next step, marketing.
We're moving along.
Yeah, moving along. I know the next step is, I think, the obvious one, and that's, your actual logistic operation. If you're getting a storefront, and obviously it entirely depends on what you're doing, how this next step looks. Are you opening a shoe store? Are you, you're going to have a storefront and physical inventory and a staff that's going to hire, sell the shoes? Are you an e-commerce, company that's going to be selling pens online? Obviously, that next step depends on what it is you're doing. But this is kind of the guts of it, the stuff that maybe isn't so glamorous or so fun, but is the building of the operational stuff, building your actual business.
Is this where you're hiring employees?
Yes, this is where you're hiring employees. At this stage, you should be the first kind of to break that next step, to break that up into like a few different steps, is to say, you need to have your actual operation defined. So we talked about your business model in the beginning, how you're going to do things. And, your business model essentially is what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and who you're going to use your resources to do it. And so this is the laying out of that. And so it's, first you obviously want to have, like, if it's going to be a website, you're selling stuff on your website, you need to get your website built. If you're going to have your store, you need to get your storefront leased and stocked out. But then, yes, be hiring your staff. Define really well who it is you need and why. Definitely don't hire from the hip. You need to draft job descriptions and make sure you have identified very clearly the skill set that's needed for each of your employees and the qualifications that go with that. And even a salary market survey to say, what should they be paid? These things are obviously important. Even right now, it's a competitive market out there for good employees. So, and that good employees are absolutely, they'll make the difference between your startup failing or succeeding, is having good staff. So this is a very important part of what you're doing. But yeah, then hiring your staff and getting to the good stuff, which is selling your product.
Is that number 8?
Yeah, that'd be number 8.
Yeah. Yay, we made it.
Yeah, I know, and 8 steps. Yeah, so I mean that would be the next step. And I would say, like, a side note to number 8, be prepared to not sleep for the next 2 years. So you're going to be very busy. I would say to everybody, this idea that being an entrepreneur means you have a looser schedule, you get to call your own hours, you don't have to work as hard. Not true. You get to call your own hours, but they'll be all the hours. You are working all the time. I would say I work far harder now as an entrepreneur than I ever worked for a company. And you'll be a lot more, because it's yours. You find, obviously, we all find ourselves a lot more invested in it, and you're excited by it. But you'll be especially in the beginning when it requires so much work. I mean, just be prepared. Your personal life, it's good to have it be rather uncomplicated so you can just focus on building your business. Because that first couple years of starting a business, you just work a tremendous amount.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I hear that all the time, that I would assume any entrepreneur typically works like 70, 80, sometimes 100 hours a week. But then you look closely 10 years later, they're working 20, 30 hours a week and traveling the world. So yeah, there's definitely a sacrifice in the beginning.
There is.
Yeah. So, Laura, I wanted to ask you, how long does this normally take? Say, from step one of vetting the idea to when you can open your doors, to when you can start selling your the products online, to whatever it is that they're selling. How long does that normally take on average?
On average, that could be done at 6 months is a good average place to put it.
Okay.
That's being somewhat aggressive. I mean,
Okay.
it can be done in 3. I wouldn't do it in less than 3. I think you're not doing it right if you're doing it in less than 3. And 6 months, and if you're saying a year, that's appropriate too. So if you want to use a benchmark, 6 months to a year, and that may sound like a year may sound like a lot, but if you break those different pieces up, sometimes funding alone can take people 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, that's good to know. And then what about to say if you're like in medical industry and you need to be creating patents or something that's very specific and unique,
Mhm.
where would that take place in this process? Is that further down the road?
No, the answers I was giving you were kind of generalized, right? But if you're saying you're in the medical space or something like that, you need to put a longer timeline for everything considerably. And I would say that comes in the beginning. So the patents and things like that, patents can take a while. I mean, but you have your temporary patent, right? So that's good. But the patent itself, there's a process to that takes a bit. But the legal, the permits, the filing, the formation takes considerably longer when you're a medical entity. So you just need to plan for that in the beginning. The other pieces, it would be on par with other businesses. But when you're talking about formation, patents, licenses, that all takes considerably longer.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So that's still in the beginning stages of, the startup plan.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, I would say the only other spoke to that is it can get more complicated also when you're in that kind of space, when you're getting further down. Also, when you're looking at staffing, for instance, like obviously your staffing and your processes have to be crafted with more care and detail and vetting than any other space.
Hey, well, thank you so much for breaking it all down. So we got 8 steps. Is that correct?
Sure. Yes, 8 steps.
Okay.
Yes, 8 steps.
Do you have any statistics or data reflecting the importance of the immigrant entrepreneur that play a big role in the US economy?
Absolutely. I feel that people really aren't aware of how incredibly important they are to our economy. So, I mean, not a lot of people are aware of this, that immigrants start firms at higher rates than native born individuals do by far. They disproportionately account for US patents and hold STEM degrees far more. Immigrant founders are 35% more likely to have a patent than firms with no immigrant founders. Immigrant founders have founded 51% of the startup companies worth 1 billion. So I don't know if anybody is aware that Google and Tesla were started by immigrants.
Oh, yes. So was PayPal.
And PayPal, yes, that's a good one too. PayPal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting also the perspective that they compete with local workers and depress the economy. And, as some people say that it's actually the opposite. They create jobs far more than they take jobs. They contribute to the economy because not only do studies show you start businesses a lot more often, but they pay on average 4.1% higher than their native born counterparts.
Mhm.
And so, that's very interesting. Yeah, it's incredible how much they contribute to the economy. That's one of the things I was going to put on my website too, is there's a infographic. There's a couple of infographics that are really cool that lay out how much they do contribute.
It's almost magical to hear those numbers because on a daily basis, I hear immigrants really come to dream big with huge passions. But a lot of them end up starting these businesses and these, huge corporations really out of survival
Mm-hmm.
because the visa requirements are insane. You can't work, you
Mm-hmm.
can't get a social security number, it takes forever. The immigration process is just horrible in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
So a lot of these people really come and they have no choice but to create businesses and they become so creative with their limited resources,
absolutely.
with their limited options, and many of them start in their backyards, in their bedrooms, in their apartments. So it's just magical to hear these numbers. So thank you so much for sharing all that data.
Of course, it's incredible, and those challenges are. I mean, obviously, we don't probably need to speak a whole lot to that because I'm sure your listeners are well aware of those challenges with visas and things like that. I don't know if they're also aware that how many programs are out there. Like I said, in response to all these initiatives that are put out there that kind of make it tougher. there's a lot, especially currently, even 2021, a lot of stuff that started in response to that push back on that are out there. And I'll share those things as well. It's just really encouraging to see.
And so, what are some of the challenges that the immigrants are facing these days when starting a business?
There's some dependency in here when you say challenges, is you are naturalized or if you're fully supposed to be here and you have your immigration status all locked up. So if that is something that is a question or you're still dealing with that, you have a different set of challenges and that wall's a lot higher to climb. So I'd say, definitely looking at getting your visa and all that stuff taken care of is often one of the biggest challenges that they face. But once that hurdle is passed, funding is obviously the next one that becomes challenged, because a lot of these institutions out there that primarily do the lending for small businesses or startups just don't give out as much lending, as they should, and sometimes, appear to be biased, and people don't get as much. So it's really connecting with those funding resources. Like I just said, it's an incredible hurdle, but the resources are there, for funding and things like I mentioned before for folks. You just have to be finding those right resources. But once you find them, that particular huge challenge, it's out there. But I would say those are two of the biggest things is really looking at the immigration status and the funding. I think what we've seen is that's one of the biggest, those are the biggest things. The third biggest thing is if, depending on if you came over here as a teen or a small child or as a young adult, your perspective on the community, that could be a challenge too. So it's really thoroughly vetting and doing a lot of market research out there on your business model or ideas, your marketing. That can also be a challenge. That's why I think having partners or associates, that are both the immigrant, but also native can help. If you have a team of the two and you have those two different perspectives, it helps with that challenge for sure.
Awesome. And so do you help immigrants out with the visa requirements at all, or do you direct them to another agency or an attorney to help them out?
Yeah, so you definitely don't need an attorney to do that specifically. Again, totally dependent on your situation. I don't specifically do visa stuff. That's not something I usually deal with, but I definitely do, as part of one of my packages, connect you with all the right resources to do that. And so a lot of what I do as a consultant, if I'm not practically hands-on doing it, providing very clear instructions and resources on how to do it. And that's one of the spaces that I would be providing very clear resources and steps on how to do it and connecting with the right resources. But yeah.
Got it. Awesome. And so I know you've mentioned some resources and some programs, but are there any other programs or resources that you can share with our immigrant entrepreneurs listening that will help them in this process and make it a little bit easier for them?
There is a lot of them. I would say, again, looking at the SBA's central resources out there is a great resource.
Okay.
There is a few different entities that are also out there meant specifically for, and it's like the U.S., there's one of them, the Women's Opportunities Resource Center, and there's a couple of them just like this. There's one called the Unshackled Ventures. I throw these names out there and they're just going to sound like names, but One Way Ventures. And these are a lot of these are just independent entities that are backed with people with significant resources that are out there for that. Mm-hmm. Here in California, there's one called the Mission Asset Fund that provides funding, smaller funding for immigrant entrepreneurs. Go on and just kind of list these entities. I will share them, like I said, on my site, because there's a long list, actually. If I was going to rattle these all off, there's a lot of them. But usually a good place to look, and if you're just thinking like to think of it in your mind, the minority business development agencies of any state. We're in California, so we're talking about California, but if your listeners are in different states, any respective state you're in has a minority business development agency or department that's connected. And they're often the central resource that you're going to look at. Like we often look as business owners to the state commerce. This is right underneath that. The minority business development often is your central place to look at.
Awesome. And I have heard of One Way Ventures. One Way Ventures, for those of the listeners that don't know, they provide funding only to immigrants. Mm-hmm. So they are a venture capitalist. Yeah. And so if you go on there, I believe it's like One Way VCs or something like that. We'll link everything in the show notes. But yeah, there's, like Laura said, there's so many different resources and programs and nonprofit organizations that are there established to help immigrants with this entrepreneurship journey. So the one thing we just wanted to relay here is that don't be afraid. Don't be scared to ask for help. And we cannot do this alone. So awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Laura. So, what are some ways you can step in and help the immigrants that are listening to get them assisted with this process?
Absolutely. I mean, me personally, and my company is called the Startup Clinic. If we didn't say that before, and what I do here, I do a lot of the practical project management, hands-on stuff to help you get launched and going. And I love that your particular demographic is one of the specific areas I'm aimed as people that don't have maybe a ton of experience or background, but really have that ambition and drive and want to do it. That's my favorite people to work with. And so I do coaching. I do 1 hour virtual, 1 to 2 hour virtual coaching sessions. I have one package called the 10 steps to launch your business, which actually is interesting that we went through 8, but that it's actually a package where I give you, I go through the 10 logistical steps you individually would take, and I custom write them for each person. It's not like a template or anything like that. It's a 10-step plan and logistically how to start your specific space. And I'll go through it. And then we do an online or virtual consultation where I walk through that step. It's very practical, clear steps on how to start your business. And you can really take that and do it. I mean, what I give is you can take it in a good 80% of it. You can do it yourself, depending on, again, the space you're in. But I do those type of things. Number one, for people that are looking for more comprehensive help, I also do the project management piece where I have a couple different businesses right now where I'm the project manager and I'm going to do like the whole thing from beginning to end where I go. So I do a lot of stuff. I do anywhere from, doing these 1 hour consultations and giving some direction and guidance and resources to the full project management. And if you want help from, A to Z, that's something that I do too. It's a different kind of endeavor. It's a consulting engagement, but yeah, I do that as well. So I've got a couple different folks that I do that for right now. And that would be, all the practical stuff from getting the formation, connecting and getting the formation done, to getting the permits, to finding your storefront, to hiring your staff. I actually have a marketing partner as well that does the marketing piece. So she does all of the, the website, the online marketing, the social media stuff. And so all those things are things that I can do. And either I'm doing them in-house or I have my partner do them.
So the hands-on items that you can tackle are developing the business name, getting the legal stuff together. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, all of those things. And as well, business plan writing. That's my specialty. I'd say when you're planning to do your business plan and you're thinking that you're going to write this out in a couple of nights, I'd say earmark out, a good month to draft a business plan. It takes me a good 3 weeks to 4 weeks. And I'm somebody who's done hundreds. So yeah, so I do a lot of business plans. And so I've got a couple different ways I do them. I do full business plan writing myself, where I do the whole shebang.
Yeah.
Or I also have packages where I help people and I give them direction, guidance, and coach them through writing their own plan. Obviously, it's less expensive to do the second one. But I do those type of things too. So yeah, business plans too. But yeah, I do the whole, I could do formation, the permits, putting your business name together, putting your marketing strategy together, my marketing partner, and then practical operation stuff that we just mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. And especially the fact that you've already been in several different startup industries in Silicon Valley, like that is hands-on experience right there. So that's amazing that you were able to take that and just branch out and do it on your own and be successful on that. So good job, Laura.
Thank you. Thanks. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so do you serve the entrepreneurs nationwide or are you just California based?
Oh no, nationwide. Nationwide. I mean, that's the great thing about things being virtual, right?
Yeah.
I'm currently working with people now all over the United States. I'm working with in the far parts of the United, like it's actually really cool. And I've even seen quite an uptick with COVID and everything. A lot more people are moving to online. I'm hearing from people and I work with people all over the United States. I don't do outside the United States, but
yeah.
all over the United States, yeah.
So then how do you keep track of like the tax requirements, because you cross the border to Oregon, there's no income tax. You cross over to Texas and they got different taxes. So how do you keep a tally of all the different, you got to register here and to the state board here. How do you keep track of all that?
Yeah, well, I'd say, when I was working hands-on with these startup companies in the Silicon Valley, I often worked for startups. Startups often have their arms in across borders. And so I worked for national startups that had entities in, Colorado and Oregon. And I had to, in those, my experience from there, helping them form, at a very large level in other entities, that gave me some great experience. And it's, as long as you know how to do it. And again, that was just really great experience and it taught me. how to reach across borders, and everything we need. All those resources are there and available if you know how to get them and you know what you need to get. It's not a problem. It's just knowing that information.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. You're a superwoman.
Thank you.
All right. So, Laura, where can our listeners find you?
Oh, sure. They can find me at www.thestartup, just like it sounds, .clinic. It's not .com. It's .clinic. CLINIC.
And are you on Facebook, Instagram, anywhere else?
Mm-hmm. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. You might find a couple other startup clinics, but you should find me first because my SEO is pretty good.
Oh, got it. Nice. Well, Laura, thank you so much for coming on the show. And all of my listeners are going to benefit tremendously from the wealth of information that you've provided and all of the resources that we're going to link on the show notes. So thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. And I wish you all the best. So
yes, thank you so much for having me.
again.
This was so much fun. I really, really had fun. Thank you.
Alrighty, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If there are any links that were mentioned in this episode, make sure to check them out on my website under this episode to find all the links conveniently located in the show notes. I just wanted to ask for a quick favor. If you could please leave a review wherever you're at listening to this podcast. Also, if you're an immigrant entrepreneur and would love to be on my podcast, please email me and we'll get connected. I'll see you guys all next time for another exciting and impactful episode. Take care.